Hello, folks. Welcome to Survivor Stories. This is Michael Broussard of Ask a Sex Abuse Survivor. Today, we are fortunate to have with us survivor David Pittman, who will be telling his story and who has graciously agreed to answer your questions. If you have a question for David at any time during the presentation, all you need to do is go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, click where it says Q&A, type in your question or comment, and I will get to those and read those off to David as we proceed through. Don't wait for David to stop talking or me to stop talking. Just go ahead and type it in, and that way it'll be there the next time we have a break. So I would like to say thank you very much, David, for being here today. I truly appreciate it.
It's an honor to be with you, man. I've appreciated and do appreciate all that you've been doing for quite a while now. So it's an honor to be here, bud.
It's a mutual thing. I mean, you do amazing work out there, and you're bringing the truth to people, and you're bringing them direct perspective from a survivor, doing all these talks, and it's gold. It makes it easier for the rest of us as we go out there into the world because there's more people who understand.
Just hearing somebody else, when you hear that, right, they get it, and you're not alone.
It's so true. And, there's an old thing about preaching to the converted and how it's not a valuable thing. But the reality is when you're out there and you're talking about your story and you connect, somebody else connects to you or hears something that makes them feel braver, that is powerful. So we need to talk and we need to preach to each other.
So can I tell you, like, that just made me triggered a thought in my mind, and reason why I think what you said is so important about that. So in NA and AA, they talk about the rooms, right, and why those rooms are so important. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this as we go on, but this triggered something I think is useful. I kept going right early on, and I just thought it was a waste of time. Like I'm not this person, I'm not that person, but I kept hearing people say, keep coming back, keep coming back. And it wasn't, and so I don't even know how many times it was, but then finally I heard someone talking and I was hearing my story, right? That was when I realized why we need to hear preaching to the converted, right? Why we need to hear that, because when you hear someone else tell your story, man, that's what enables you and frees you to be able to tell your own.
I agree 100%. I mean, recognition is so important. I don't know about you, and I'm going to ask you this question because it's certainly something I went through as a child being abused. When it happened to you, did you feel like you were the only person in the universe that it ever happened to?
1,000%, a million percent. There, in 1980 or 81, when it first began, it was like, I was 12. It's 1980. There was no Oprah's 200 men, right, or 200 people. There were no books about. I had never even heard the words childhood sexual abuse put together. Our parents had not heard. I mean, I think the first literature on it in medical journals was 78, so it would have been 2 years later. So even our parents didn't have any education about it. So absolutely, I feel like I was the only person, not just in the world.
Exactly, in the entire world, and as we just said, that it's so important to know that we're not, and there are people out there who still don't know that they're not. So this is why we do these things. You said 1980 was when it began. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened in as much or as little detail as you are comfortable with?
Sure. So I'll just jump right into it from the time I was 12 until the time I was 15. Suburbs of Atlanta, about, I think we were like 12, 15 miles outside of Atlanta. A big mega church, one of the first mega churches, and it was the youth minister. And for those 3 years, it was molestation and rape. And the result of that was I spent 25 years of active addiction to numb myself from the pain of it. You know, I don't, to me, the details of the abuse aren't as important as the effects of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the effects for me were, it destroyed everything that was good in my life, relationships, career. I was explaining this to my whole life story at one time. I was talking to this guy about it. He said it was desolation, isolation, and incarceration. And it really summed up the effects of it, you know. And while I never had the thoughts, I want to die, I was trying real hard to kill myself. And then one day, evidently when I was at my rock bottom, and it just happened to be the right time. You know, I had eventually reestablished a relationship with my dad, and he said, "Can I help you?" And it was the right moment. I was tired of fighting this war that was going on in my soul and in my mind, that was being played out in my body, because I was killing it, right? And so once I did, like once that fog was lifted and I was clean from the effects of drugs, I could ask myself the question, why? Why was I harming myself in that way?
Mm-hmm.
And I could answer then that question because I couldn't hide behind it anymore. Why I was trying to do this, because I didn't want to admit what had happened, the molestations, the rapes. I didn't want to admit that the man that was teaching me about God all week long was the very one doing this. I didn't want to acknowledge the confusion and the pain and the way that my body had betrayed me, right? What do I do with that? You know, tried to go to the police, but I was past the point of statute of limitation that expired. I was 38 at that point. So I spent a lot of time, and and we'll get into the healing aspect of it, but so that's kind of where I got with it. And I won't go further into the healing parts because I know you wanted to talk about that too.
Well, certainly, it's interesting listening to you talk about, you know, basically trying to destroy yourself, but not it being as overt as
Right.
direct suicide attempts. It's something I'm very familiar with. Addiction, drugs, alcohol, self-destructive behavior.
Right.
And I think it is not for everybody, but it's a commonality for a lot of us, And it took me a while to realize that's what I was doing.
What you just said, I thought it doesn't matter what path of self-destruction. I think that self-destruction is that's what we all can relate to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a couple of questions here. I'm going to check this out, see what we have. Well, first of all, Paul says, hello, thanks for showing up, David. Thank you to Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Thank you, Paul, for being here as well. Talia says, abusers rely on isolation. Isolation is part of the grooming process. Telling our stories is so important.
Absolutely. You know, what the first thing you asked, did you feel alone? And what Talia, right, Talia? What
Yep,
she said,
Talia.
Isolation, absolutely it is. She's absolutely spot on with that. The predators, man, because that's what they are. They're predators. Whether we were isolated or not to begin with, they're going to pull us away from the herd, as it were, to make us feel as though there's no one else that we can tell, there's no one that will believe us. All manner of things, they're going to keep isolating us with that.
You know, we got a couple more things here in the Q&A, but I want to kind of follow up on what you just said about them pulling us away from the herd and isolating us. The person who abused me tried to make it seem like we shared secrets, and I should feel special because of that. Did you experience any of that?
Good grief, man. You talk about making you feel special. I think that's where, like, he would pick me up first and drop me off last, would take me to concerts where like with the other adults, like I was the only one from the youth group that was doing that. And I could list a dozen things, but I think I know your audience is wise enough to know and to comprehend all of those aspects of that to make you feel special so that you would feel that way, right? You're not gonna tell, you're not gonna talk about it because this is our thing. Because what then, like at the time, my dad wasn't in my life, and I didn't feel like there was that and role model's not even the right thing, but there just wasn't that presence, right? There wasn't that male presence in my life. I don't know if y'all can hear the lightning storm behind me.
We just heard a little bit of it. It sounded like the sky exhaled.
It was a big boom. Coming to you from South Florida, where we have our share of hurricanes, and this is the beginning. This is the prequel to that. So, sorry, that kind of shook me up a lot. It was really close. What was I just talking about then?
Oh, you were talking about making you feel special, bringing you to concerts, all these things that they did only with you.
And so you get, even though you knew that even as a child, this is wrong and this is horrible. Because I didn't have that presence in my life of that father. That was the other thing. He was filling that void of what I was needing in that regard.
Yeah, I think I think it's very important to have those positive parental figures, and yeah, I can understand why he would have therefore been important to you despite what he was doing, right? Because we all need guidance, in some way. I have some thoughts, but before I do that, I'm going to go back to the Q&A because I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask their questions. Larry says, on that question of feeling I'm the only one being abused, that happens even when the boy knows it's untrue. I felt that even when I was being molested together with a close friend. I felt that even when I was being molested together with a close friend. Same age you're talking about, David. Right. 13, me and my friend, 11. Did you know of anyone else who was being abused in your?
So I did. I learned later. I didn't know at the time. I didn't find out until I started blogging my story. Until we started Together We Heal, I didn't know of other survivors of this particular predator. But I get what the question you're saying about it, about how you still, no matter, even if it's still in the presence of, you still feel, because it's when you go back to your house and to your bed and it's your thoughts, it's not the thoughts that somebody else was there. It's still that child, as a child, you're internalizing all of that has just happened to you. So I totally get why he would feel, even with the presence of another victim at the same time, you still feel totally alone.
Larry also says, on the comment about the destructive effects, did you ever feel like maybe you're not even real?
Maybe. That's a one I'd have to really dig into. I know maybe this is what kind of he's referring to. You disassociate, or at least I did, right? I tried to, so there's fight, there's flight, there's flee, right? There's fawn. It's not just fight or flight. There's a number of ways that a child will respond in those moments. And I froze, right? That was mine. I froze. And I just tried to pretend like this is not happening. I'm somewhere else. And so even, so then that locks my brain into that this didn't happen, and I compartmentalize. So maybe that's where I would feel in that it wasn't, that I'm not real and this isn't real. That's how my little child mind did it, and it carried on for a long time, feeling and thinking that way.
That was my response to the abuse as well, was that freeze and the dissociation, which of course I didn't realize at the time was a thing called dissociation, because we're kids,
Right.
The brain goes somewhere else, and it's a protective measure, but we don't necessarily know that's what's happening to us. Dissociation actually bled deeply into my life before I found out what it was. Did you find yourself dissociating as an adult after the abuse was over?
One of the things yes, there's the short answer, yes. And one of the things that I have since learned is, like, when we get frozen, in time. In that moment, I stopped maturing, I stopped progressing, I stopped moving forward. And so everything was frozen in that moment, in that time frame, I should say. It wasn't just one moment, it was it was too many. One's too many, but y'all know what I mean. And so I couldn't move forward with anything, right? I couldn't move forward with a relationship, with responsibility. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense with the question?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It actually makes me think of things in a different way than I had in the past. So I appreciate that, because I can look back and say, my God, all those years I was spinning my wheels and not making any progress. But I've had to learn not to judge myself for that. And the way you described it, I think, is exactly what was happening, which there was no question of getting better or growing, because I'd been frozen that way by that experience. We have another question here. Oh, Paul is just saying, oh yes, wise after the fact. And I think we're all wise after the fact, aren't we? That's what this is all about, right? Being wise after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about being frozen that way, and when was it and how was it that the change came, when you could go from where you were being frozen because of the abuse as an adult, and going, okay, now I'm going to start working on it? When did you become aware? When did that happen?
It took me a long time. 2006 was when I publicly came forward, but I still struggled, right, for a long time, and it hit me one night, and when I say hit me one night, it wasn't like it was the first time I'd had the thought. It was the first time I'd had the thought and then said, what can I do with it, right? All of the guilt, the self-blame, the shame, the thoughts of other little boys after, right? After me. But now that I'm in a place where I can just have the ability to say this out loud and then publicly. So what can I do to stop him from hurting other little boys? And it really even took another 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, because I was still, I was getting clean, right? It was, that's a process, and it's ongoing forever, right? Hi, my name's David. I'm an addict. That's just true today as it was then, even though it's been 17 years, right? 17, 18 since I've been clean. That doesn't change that. But so it really took that long before I could do something. And then 2011 was when I like started publicly. I started blogging. I started journaling, and then my mom said, "Hey, there's this thing called blogging."
Your mom said.
And she has no knowledge about like, anything, technologically speaking. I'm like, yeah, Mom, I've heard of it. But she knew how much I loved to write. And she said, well, then why don't you? So the funny thing is, there was nothing altruistic about me starting that. It was just for me to personally, like, to help me heal. But then came the connections and other things that I'm happy to share about.
I mean, you've done an amazing job from that point out. You have this organization, Together We Heal. You have, I follow all of the things that you're doing, all the places you go, the different kind of audiences you speak before, and the people that you're able to educate. And I also am very pleased when I see, as you said earlier, when you're looking out there and you realize that they get it. And, you're talking about it not being altruistic. I think that, initially it was also just for me because I needed to work it out. And it's weird because you kind of find yourself hearing from people that they're finding what you're doing helpful.
Right.
What was that like when you first started hearing back from people that something you had done or a talk or a blog post you put up or whatever had helped them with their day or what they were trying to figure out?
Man, that's remarkable. So like I said, 2011 is when I started like really doing that. And I was getting this feedback. I figured a couple dozen people might respond, right? If at best. And then all of a sudden, because on the blogs you can trace, what state, what city, all of a sudden, what country. Are you kidding me? People in other countries are reading this. And it gave me such a sense of community, of not feeling alone, of not carrying this burden by myself, that people would help me with this, and simply by me writing and talking back. And then we're we're texting and we're DMs and anything we can do to help each other. It's remarkable. It was also at the point I actually had to make a decision, or at least I felt I had to make a decision, that this could just continue to be about just that cross-pollination of helping each other back and forth, right? Or was it going to be something bigger than that, right? Were we going to do something more? And that's what we did. And then eventually with Together We Heal, we partnered with Grace and like you're talking about, communicating with churches or schools or civic organizations, anybody that'll have us teach.
There are so many people out there who I'm sure started along the same way that I started or you started or however. And I find great comfort in the fact that there are legions of people, not just survivors, certainly survivors, but also legions of people who actually care about survivors, who are out there saying there's something going on and we have to do something about it. Do you feel that there are times when you're working with these other organizations or just getting a message, an email or a text message from another survivor, that they have given you an aha moment, something that you didn't realize about your own self and your own journey?
Sure, right. I mean, that again, I'll go back to the cross-pollination, right? I mean, we constantly, at least I feel like I'm constantly learning. Whether it's just this isn't a learning, but there's kind of two things into it. So you've mentioned not just survivors. So I had a grandmother in North Carolina reach out to me. This is early on, and she didn't have any idea where to start. She just knew their grandchild was in a bad position. So because of our ability to walk her through the whole steps, how to report, getting a forensic interviewer, does the district attorney have any free resources available to them? If not, what can we help provide for them? So that's the other part. It's not just the survivors, just survivors, but also parents, grandparents, teachers, anybody. But that was one of those aha moments for me, was there's so many other people that need to hear this. When we say 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys, you're talking about 20% of the population. So that's not just the 20% that we know about that are victimized, that's their family. That's the people that need to be able to support them, need to be able to understand how to support them. So that was a huge aha for me.
You mentioned in that forensic interviewers, which I think are an amazing tool, amazing thing to have out there. Would you like to talk for a moment about what a forensic interviewer is in these circumstances?
Sure. So that's somebody that is trained. They're both legal, they have the legal understanding, the medical legal, and the ethical training, if you want to call it that, but they also have a license. They know how to properly ask questions of a child that are not going to re-traumatize them. They're going to help them be able to express what has happened to them, both in a way that is helpful to the courts for prosecution, but also not harmful to the child as they go about it. And it is you can't, I was just at a church a few weeks ago, and one of the big things I was telling them, here are the questions not to ask, right? As a matter of fact, you don't want to ask them hardly anything. Now, if they just want to talk, you don't want to interrupt. You just want to listen and be there for them. You let a trained professional do that type of questioning, because it has to be in the right setting. It's got to be with the right understanding of it.
Absolutely. I actually learned about forensic interviewers via the Philadelphia Children's Alliance, who I've done quite a lot of work with over the years. And what they do is they provide basically a response team when any child discloses. There are forensic interviewers, there are people to guide, legal advisors and people to guide parents or the protective parent through the legal system. There is immediate counseling and support if you want it. There are all these things. Right. And the notion of having something available to children that will not re-traumatize them is a huge thing. I went in to do a training with them, actually. I was not being trained. I was helping them train their forensic interviewers because I had a background as a survivor, and I was basically pretending to be a child so they could practice. And it's really interesting, and it's all these little things that, you get to do, I get to do, the people that we know who do this get to do. For me, at least, I think the opportunity to do those things has made me feel to some degree more optimistic that things can change and things do change.
I'll say it again. There wasn't even really any legal, there was no papers on this until the late 70s. So parents didn't even have the opportunity to have an education about it, much less to protect. Flash forward to where we are now, we have the reality of it. We have the numbers. There are, as you mentioned, you've got resources available. Most any city that has a district attorney's office will have some kind of victim assistance, now the larger the city, the more it is, and the smaller, the less. That's just going to be the way it is. But what you can do is you can access from a different city that it may be across the state, but you can still utilize those. They're usually going to be available to you in some way. And if not, then reach out to us and we'll help you find some that are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm always more than happy to pass on that kind of information. The Philadelphia Children's Alliance that I mentioned is part of a state organization, and there are children's advocacy centers, which is what they call them, all across the state. And as you said, there's parallels all over the place. There's also a National Children's Alliance, and his
Right.
children's advocacy centers across many, many states. And I'm more than happy to connect people to those. Because like you said, when it happened to us, me, it was the early 1970s. There was nothing. There was nobody. There was, I'm going to send you, because you're on welfare, we're going to send you to the free counseling. And you're going to talk to somebody who, of course, was not trauma informed, because there was no such thing.
There was no such thing.
There was no such thing. And so I go there, and what do I talk about? I don't want to talk about what happened. It's horrifying and embarrassing. I talked about comic books and movies and stuff. That's what I talked about.
And they didn't have the training to know how to ask you the right questions for you to be able to feel comfortable enough to talk about what had happened.
Exactly, exactly. As we talk about this, and we're talking about opportunities for healing and opportunities for support, could you talk about some occasions in your life which stand out for you as healing moments, either that you were able to affect through what you did, or somebody else presented to you by the way they spoke to you, or something you encountered?
For me, so I'll tell you that's the first thing I can explain, right? For me, journaling, which turned into the blogging, trauma-informed care. Once I even understood, as we were talking about, once I understood and once I knew it was available, because even now, let me just say this, just because someone has those words in their little bio, that doesn't mean they actually have it. They may have taken a class for a advanced credit, but it doesn't mean they have any real life experience. So that would be another question. Make sure you ask of a therapist, oh, for how many years, how many clients, because you got to be your own advocate. You need to ask those questions. Whether it was in a group setting, whether it was talk therapy, EMDR, equine therapy, whatever is out there, and keep, if something doesn't work, then try something else. Because that's what I had to do. I had to keep going up through all these different things till some things started helping me be able to have some understanding. You remember I said getting to that why I was doing this, addressing that, and then they enabled all of those, the therapist and the group and the one-on-one. It enabled me to then have proper coping skills, right? Because I didn't have any. I was doing it all wrong. So that was a big part for me, and being able to pass that along, and it's huge to be able to do that. That's why, there's no enjoyment. I mean, that's not the right word, but the satisfaction of being able to help another survivor come to those same terms and find some coping skills, like I've learned, being able to connect them with truly trauma-informed therapists, with other organizations like SNAP. Absolutely, it means a lot to be able to do that.
Paul had a question. He's asking, could you please share your experience with one-on-one therapy versus your experience with peer-to-peer support groups?
The peer-to-peer helped me have better success in the one-to-one. For me, that was, and again, there's no right way, wrong way, backwards, forwards, but I found that the peer-to-peer, where we had a really good facilitator, that also was important. Enabled us to be able to open up about things, to be comfortable, to feel safe in that environment. And when we shared our stories, hearing that I wasn't alone, it made me more comfortable to be able to talk, just like I am now. I mean, I'm talking about these things that at one time I wouldn't have told a soul. So the peer-to-peer was more useful early on, and for me to be able to open up, to have success one-on-one, does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're talking about. I've gotten a lot out of one-on-one therapy, but it was only in the latter part of my life because I finally found someone trauma-informed. Right. But the peer-to-peer, for every reason you just mentioned, is so rich and so, in a way, embracing, because I end up feeling part of a wider community. And I think that that's very important, to feel part of a community, particularly when, like a lot of us did, we felt isolated for so many years of our lives.
Right.
So, we're healing, and it's a constant thing. It's not like a thing with a beginning, middle, and end, and then we're healed and then we stop and everything's fine.
Right.
So things still happen. When you find yourself triggered by something, could you talk about the kind of things that might trigger you, maybe give us an example, and B, how you meet that trigger, what you do to mitigate that trigger?
For me, it's I can immediately tell you the one that is the worst, and that's scent. I cannot, to this day, I don't wear cologne, aftershave. Thankfully, I don't have BO, so that, my wife's appreciative of that. But I can't wear any of that stuff. And I can't even be around someone, when somebody like really drowns themselves in it, can't be in their presence. I have to remove myself from the situation, because it just instantly takes me back to very bad moments. And so that's the first thing I do. I'm very open about that. So hopefully people who are around me will get that message, that I'm not going to be able to be in your presence if this is how you how you conduct yourself. And then when it's people I don't meet and everybody that I don't know and that are just, I'll be very courteous, but I'm just going to remove myself from the situation. There have been times where it's been a place that has been triggering, and I've had anxiety attacks. I'm a believer in medication if needed, and again, going back to addiction issues, under the very wise and judicious care of a physician who knows your history and is aware of it. You have to be completely honest and open with them, because then otherwise you just can fall into a bad place again. So for me, I've had to use medication at times for anxiety attacks. It's a lot of breathing techniques is one of the biggest things. Once I can no longer smell the smell, I do a lot of, in through the nose and out through the mouth. It sounds really simple, but it has worked for me a whole lot. And then the biggest one is your support structure. I could only get so far on my own. If I didn't have some people who know everything that's been going on, that I let them know when these things occur, here's what I may need help with, and then they're able to, and you build that support, and that has, over years, I've got now more and more people that I can call and count on. I think all of those things, there's not ever going to be one thing, I believe, it's all better now. And as you said at the beginning of that question, it's a healing journey, right? It's every day moving forward.
Exactly. And I think one of the most damaging things that I held on to for a lot of years, I was about to say too many years, but I'm not supposed to criticize myself like that, was the notion that if something came up that I had decided 3 years ago I dealt with, and if it came up again, I felt like I hadn't dealt with it and I'd failed. But the reality is healing doesn't work like that.
Right.
And it's not a straight line. And if you're dealing with something you dealt with before, that doesn't mean you're going backwards. Healing for me is a constant state of being. You mentioned your support system, and you mentioned your wife several times. It's always interesting to hear the kind of relationship somebody has who has a partner, who's you're a survivor. Two things. First, is she a survivor? And second, how does that relationship look How do you communicate with her about what you're going through? How does she support you? That sort of thing.
Yes, she is. So she gets it, right? I mean, not that you can't get it if you're not, but she has a greater understanding, a deeper understanding of it because of that. And we will be married 9 years this summer. And so part of when we started dating, actually, again, we were high school sweethearts and just kind of made our way back around to each other. But that's a whole other story. But one of the things we talked about was, of course, what led us to the things that where we were now, and being open and honest with each other about all of that was, and I know this is a cheesy cliche when people say communication, but it is the truth, right? If you are not communicating with one another, you're not going to have success in any facet of the relationship. Much less if you're holding this stuff in from what had happened. And if the very person who is, in my belief, they're supposed to be your best friend, right? Your confidant. And if they can't be there for you with that, then the rest of it, I don't see how it works. She's amazing, and I love her dearly, and I'm so grateful.
I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. I have the same thing. She's not a survivor, but she is magnificent. She's there, and she's willing to deal with all this stuff,
Right.
and more than happy to. So she's a survivor, and you're a survivor. And if you don't want to talk about this, it's okay. But who spoke first about the abuse? How did that come about? When did you each learn about each other's experiences? And what was that like?
I don't remember who said it. Well, probably because I know at that time I was already public. So it was probably that's probably how the conversation began, because I don't remember exactly how, but I'm sure that's how it started was, so tell me more about what you're doing. Matter of fact, I know that is exactly, because it wasn't until after that, then at some point she said, well, here's what happened also when I was in high school. And it just began as conversations. The more I think about it now, it's starting to make me remember some times where we had them, and we just began to. It wasn't a sit down all at once, right, and just unload. It was more of a over the course of time. Even in our early years of our marriage, we would talk more and learn more. And it's always, how does it look? It's always been supportive. There's never been, I've never doubted, right, her. I've never perceived any doubt from her about what I was telling. And then in all of the, like when I have to go out of town, there's times where she can't go. A lot of the time she can't go because she's got to work too. But she's always been very supportive of my roles at Together We Heal or at Grace or whatever I was doing. So it's always been very supportive.
Going back to when you first disclosed to someone as an adult, when did that happen? How did that happen? And what was that situation like for you?
Well, as I told you, 2006 was the first time it was like I was making this public. So it would have been, it's going to be at different times throughout that year to different people, to my mom, to my counselor, therapist, to my friends, right? So I told you we went to it was a mega church, right? So we probably had 200 to 300 that were active every Sunday, Wednesday, just in the youth group. So the size of our youth group was the size of your average church, And so that kind of gives you an idea of how many people are in this. And so with the exception of just maybe a hand, but when I say a handful, just 2 or 3 that I thought were friends from back then, everybody else that I told this has been supportive of me. And this is, what I do know is that from talking to other survivors, I feel like this is a bit of an anomaly because I don't feel most survivors get that kind of support. My mom has been, gosh, she's so amazing. I actually wrote this down because I wanted to make sure, or typed it down. I wanted to make sure I explained this because when you were asking me some questions, hang on a second. Oh, here it is. Oh, that's not it. I'm sorry that I'm doing this, but I want to say this exactly how. Well, anyway, all right, so here's how I'm trying to remember exactly how I wrote it down was my mom enabled me to have the opportunity to heal. And she put a roof over my head, and I'm a grown man right at this point, right? But I'm a mess. I'm a wreck. She gave me a safe space. She didn't put any pressure. She just said, do what you need to do. Go to meetings, your therapist, and so she was supportive. My friends were supportive. I didn't like I said, minus 2 or 3. I didn't feel like anybody else didn't believe what I was telling them, even though this person that so many people looked up to, so many people had married. He'd married a bunch of officiated the weddings of. So I always felt that way. And I'm sorry if I've digressed here on a different path.
No, it's fine.
It's what it got me thinking about was I wish more survivors had that experience. Where I do have the same experience is once it was public before the church, that's when I've had the exact same, whether it was the Georgia Baptist or the Southern Baptist, as the national entity, they all were the same. When this going back to 2006, 2011, 2012, they told me to be quiet. They told me to go away, told me there was nothing they could do about it, all of that nonsense. But it was my family and my friends and my support structure I was building saved me.
We have a question. I have something I want to say, but first I want to check this question. Paul says, I feel I was betrayed by a religious institution. Actually, he's talking about what I wanted to talk about. Okay. Thank you, Paul. Paul says, I feel I was betrayed by a religious institution. I had reached out to clergy for help after being abused by a teacher. Nothing was done. It seemed the scandal was more important than me. The school was more important. God or God's representatives were, quote unquote, not willing to help me. Please share your journey in that theme.
Yeah, I could talk for the next 2 days about, I know exactly what you mean with that, because that was my experience. I went to the people that I thought would be the first and foremost to help me. Like you said, it's supposed to be God's representatives and care for the downtrodden and oppressed. Well, there's not much more downtrodden and oppressed than a child being victimized by those more powerful. And then you throw God into the mix. And so my experience was exactly that. Like I was on the phone with this one person who was the person assigned for me to report to. And he told me flat out, his exact words were that each church, because what I was wanting to do was, look, it isn't even about me anymore. I know that there's nothing legally I can do because of the statute of limitation, but I'm trying to prevent this predator from hurting anymore in your church. And he said to me, David, there's nothing we can do. Each church is independently autonomous, and we can't tell them who to hire. And then he finished it with, but we would like to pray for you. You can imagine what I really wanted to tell you. Right. That was my first interaction with the church in doing this. The first, actual interaction. And so that's when I realized I was not going to get anywhere with the leadership of this particular group. And so that's when what I started doing was, so I had to do the work of a law enforcement investigator. I had to find out where he was. So through friends of friends of friends, I found out he was a church in, middle Georgia. And so I physically drove from South Florida to Georgia and told the pastor, here's what's happened. This guy that's on your staff. So they confronted him. Not at that moment. I went and they later did. And here's what the pastor and the chairman of deacons said, that when they asked, so do you know the name David Pittman? His response was, oh yeah, he was kind of a messed up kid back then. There are a lot of ways you could describe me as a teenager, but I was a devout, Bible carrying, fundamentalist, good, do nothing wrong child. Messed up? No, I was only messed up because of what he did. Right. So, and so they were able to catch him in lies. They also found pictures on the computer, so they allowed him to resign. So then he picks up and moves town to another. And then now he's a substitute, or then he was a substitute teacher in a school system. And I had to go to the superintendent of school. So I'm literally following him around the state of Georgia, getting him removed from one job to another, until this latest church, where he is still currently the youth music minister. You can see him on Sundays, every Sunday on the pulpit with him. They defend him, they support him, and they want him there. I've tried to go to the denomination. I've given talks. I've done everything I can. I was on CBS Evening News with whatever her name is. In-depth interview about this. I have put his name out nationally on national news. I've done literally everything I can do legally. And that's been my experience with it. Extremely frustrating. Here's what I'll say about it. This is my true belief. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I do. What I don't believe in is institutional change. I don't believe in it. I don't believe the Roman Catholic Church, the Southern Baptist, Presbyterian, the church where I now go, the wife and I now go to Episcopal. I don't believe the Episcopal Church. I don't believe any of the institutions will ever do anything that changes, that really protects kids. What I do believe in are individuals who want to help, or an individual church that has said, man, we've got this wrong. Please help us. That's who I believe in and who I'll help. But the institutions, frankly and honestly, can all go to hell because they're not doing anything.
First of all, I want to say thank you for what you have done, because the Herculean effort you have put in to pursue this guy and try to keep him from getting these, what I call, positions of opportunity.
Right.
That is amazing. That makes me feel protected as a survivor. So thank you for doing that. It is beyond, it is bravery defined. So I really appreciate that. I agree with you 100% when it comes to institutions. The institutions are not going to change, but we can find individuals who will stand up. Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe we try to go from underneath. I don't know. I mean, I wish I had all the answers to this, but we can help individual people. We can help individual situations. But yeah, I agree. The institutions are not, I've seen no evidence. I mean, you've got new legislation is passed that allows child victims to sue, and the diocese immediately declares bankruptcy. That's my feeling about their sense of responsibility. I also want to mention one other thing that I found out about this past week that I didn't know about, that these institutions actually can take out insurance to cover, I didn't know this, to cover claims of sexual abuse against them. And it's considered to be part of the cost of doing business. It just, they take out insurance, assuming this is going to happen, instead of their insurance being, let's be more aware of it happening and do something about it and prevent it from happening. It's let's make sure that we're not financially vulnerable. And that is just so gigantic.
There's actually, I've got some insurance statistics on this. We've been tracking this over the years. The two biggest things that churches are sued for, and have been now for the last decade, and going back more, and it flip-flops back and forth between 1 and 2. You know, the traditional type of slip and fall, like somebody injures themselves, right? And I don't mean just slip and fall, but the injuries on the property.
Somebody slips in some holy water.
Right. And the other is sexual abuse. That's it. Those are the two biggest things that, and so it's all writers of their insurance policies, and they can get, if they even do, this is a really kind of another dirty little secret about it. There are certain organizations who, if they get taught about child safeguarding from certain organizations, then the insurance, because they've got a relationship with the insurance company, then the insurance company will give them a break. Like, you know, when you put an alarm on your house, you get a break. Well, these types of relationships are going on with organizations that are supposed to be teaching about child safeguarding, when all that it's really about, it's not about children's safety. It's about insurance. Yeah.
We have a question, because I have no idea what to say at this moment. I was going to say my God, but there's the issue. So Paul says, betrayal by God seems a bit more tender. You can't get God fired, he says.
You know, it took me for 25 years, I didn't darken the door of a church except for weddings and funerals, right? It took me a long time, and it certainly wasn't the same. Like, I feel like now I do have a measure of peace in my spiritual life, but it has nothing to do with an institution. We have a little parish that my wife and I told you we go to, but it's not that we're there every Sunday, and it's not that we're doing mission trip. You know, we just go when we want to go. We're grateful. They've had me come. They asked. I didn't ask them. They asked me, would you come in and teach? Would you come in and educate about this? Do a training on this? Would you do an hour here? Because they've shown that type of interest, that's made me feel more confident about and more comfortable about being there. And all of that has helped me get to where I feel better about like I said, my spiritual walk is it's in a very different place than I was as a kid. And certainly not the beliefs that I had as a kid.
That is beautiful, though. I mean, to have a place to go, a place to fill that thing inside of you that is actually proactive and actually cares about human beings and about children and about adults. I mean, that's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. And I'm glad you have found that. I myself don't really have any church connections of any kind, but I say that I'm more spiritual than anything else. And I believe in being kind for its own sake.
And I hope your audience hears me when I say this. I'm not trying to project that your audience needs how I'm finding healing the will. Please understand that I am not saying that at all. I'll go back to what I said earlier. Whatever it is that helps you, that's what you should do and what you need to do. We are all different beings, and man, whatever helps us. You know, I had somebody in one of the rooms say, man, I don't care if your higher being is a toilet bowl. If it helps you stay clean and sober for the day.
we all find our center, we all find our anchors, we all find these things. And some people find it in faith, some people don't find it in faith. We talked earlier about meditation works for some people, not for others. For me, I take it. For other people, it's a bad thing. You know, talk therapy, maybe yes, no. I mean, that's what's so great about doing these things, is that I talk to so many people with so many different journeys, and it just points up over and over again that the bottom line here is just what you said. What helps you is what you should do, and what you're comfortable with is what you should do. But what's nice is we can give each other these little nuggets of knowledge and experience, you know, that then people can go out and they can ruminate on that, and they can maybe add that to themselves into their own journey, if it's something that rings with them. We have one more question here. It's Talia saying, thank you, David. This has been an amazing hour. What is your website? Is there a Facebook page too? Please.
Yes, and yes. If you Google Together We Heal, it should be what comes up. It's together-we-heal.org. Make sure you do that. It's an org. And we do have a Facebook page. There was, just on that, there's one that's, there was one that was initially created in error, but there's one that should have a lot more information that's updated. So just make sure you go to one that shows a lot of information and recent things, whereas the other one that only has a few posts from 12 years ago, you know, that's the one that was in error. We were still learning things, and you can. It's Twitter. Twitter is @together_we-heal. Hang on, let me let me tell you. I should know this by now, shouldn't I?
But send it all to me, and I will put it in the caption at the end of the. I'll put it in the caption at the end when the video goes up as well, so everybody knows.
Yes, we got online presence out the yin yang.
And Together We Heal does magnificent work for anybody out there. They're doing incredible work. There's all these different organizations that do complementary work. Not everybody is doing the same thing, but we're all pulling in the same direction. I have here from Lori, Dr. Lori Pitts, says, thank you so much. What a powerful story. So glad I didn't miss this today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lori. I appreciate that.
We appreciate you, Dr. Lori. I appreciate you, David. Before we go, is there anything else that you haven't had the opportunity to say that you would like to say?
You know what? Yeah, I do have one thing written down that I have this. To me, this is important. Be patient with yourself. With this journey of healing. And for some reason, this is the thing that was on my mind. Don't feel like you have to rush out into the world of advocacy, right? I have to go and charge hell with a squirt gun now. So many survivors, I feel like, once we have had some of the weight lifted, we feel like, man, now I need to go out and be able, and I need to return this, right? I got to help others too. I got to. No, you don't. You don't have to do anything other than help yourself get better. I was in a very fortunate situation that I had several years to focus on healing. And I even had somebody tell me these exact words: wait, at least 1 year, maybe 2. If you have the desire to go out in some sort of advocacy role, wait at least 1 year, maybe 2, to give yourself time, because you can get out there before you're really prepared, and you can just be overwhelmed and knocked down. Build that foundation, build that support structure. Take your time. As the old saying goes, if you're not healthy, how can you help anyone else be healthy? So that would be my thing. Be patient with yourself and give yourself time.
Thank you for that. I think that is very important because you're right. So many of us want to immediately rush out and help other people, but we need that buffer. And I had several years buffer before I could do anything, before I actually could get out there and do anything.
It helped, didn't it?
It helped immensely, and I'm still working on myself. And other people are still teaching me things. You're teaching me things. People who message me are teaching me things. Dr. Pitt says one last thing she would like to say. She says, I have to go because I have a client. However, could you please provide me with David's contact information? I would love to have him on one of our SAN shares. I would also like information on how I may be a guest on your show. My email, she gives me her email here, and I will email her about this. Yep. And I will connect you guys together as well. She says, thanks for creating such an awesome space. I appreciate that. I appreciate, David, you being part of this awesome space and creating the space that you have created. On that note, I actually need to go and figure out what I'm going to make for dinner. So reality comes back in.
Good job. And I've got laundry to do. So
well, there you go. There's laundry. Exactly. Oh, there's dishes downstairs too. Oh, man. Thank you so much. And this will be posted again. Before we go, I want to tell everybody how they can get a hold of us. Let me put this in the center of the screen so everybody can see it. If you want to subscribe to our mailing list, it's at tinyletter.com/askasurvivor, tinyletter.com/askasurvivor. And you will get notifications about these events, about our poetry readings, about all the online stuff we do, about play performances, everything that we do. If you yourself want to tell your story, or you're a poet who wants to read your poetry online about being a survivor, if you want to be involved in any way, you have any questions, email me, askasurvivor@gmail.com. That is me. You will get me. I appreciate all of you. I thank David again. I thank all of our participants. This has been an incredible hour, and I feel like I learned a heck of a lot. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, bud.
Bye-bye.